All right, so getting started. Um, Critical role of subject matter experts, commonly known as SMEs. I think everybody might know that, but if not, SMEs is where it's at. So subject matter experts. There are other names out there, but excuse me, commonly referred to as SMEs. And so the critical role of SMEs in complex B2B sales. We're going to kind of dig into that today, but I'm also going to talk about what their role is, how they're doing it, and also ways to obviously even execute more effectively. So, as I talked about on all of our webinars, quick intro, Joy, connect senior leader, da 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 da. You don't really care. We do a lot of stuff and we do it well. So let's jump into it. So the first is there's a common misconception of what a SME is. And so people think SMEs are salespeople. And I'm not saying you on this call, but some folks do believe that SMEs are salespeople. And I wanted to kind of lay a little bit of a framework here because, like anything, when you're building a webinar, or a conversation, you want to make sure the building blocks, everybody's on the same page so there isn't misconceptions about what it is. And so commonly today, 2025, this is very much so the expectations of what a sales rep is and what a subject matter expert is, right? And again, I'm going to banner some things here. Clearly, we're talking about more typical complex sale environments, not selling widgets and things of that nature, clearly, where you don't need you don't need a subject matter expert. So these are going to be professional services, technology products, all sorts of things that require obviously um, more subject matter experts. Or so I'm not going to read through all these, but there is a distinct difference of who is guiding the sales process and then who is really the subject matter expert and deep diving into it. Now, there's always been plenty of air quote sales reps, where the problem lies for probably many of you, or you're on the brink of having this systemic problem, is the SME side. And so for a lot of corporations, there's pretty large bottlenecks and or just straight up deficiencies of SMEs. They don't have enough of them to handle it, and it's dramatically affecting sales. It's dramatically affecting all sorts of things for the organization because clients or prospects, obviously, are demanding um, pretty robust alignment and sales processes before pulling the trigger on anything, right? So the environment has changed dramatically, right? And so so sales rep and subject matter expert, all right? So everybody kind of feels good there. So then let's layer then, like let's go onion. Next one, what is the SME's role? So again, think about this um, on your in your product. Again, I try to always do these webinars knowing that like today there'll be, hundreds of people, literally different companies. So I can't exactly cater to your exact ecosystem, but in generalities here, everything could be a little bit different, but primarily this is what a SME's role is in modern B2B sales, right? So as the sales process is going on early stage, quite frankly, first 50% of the sale is more just penetrating the organization. We haven't even gotten from like, dating to getting married, right? So it's really early stage. Then all of a sudden, hopefully in a positive way, it starts to like, this is getting real. And of course, in complex B2B sales, there's going to be a lot more stakeholders, everything, but ultimately, the client is going to start to desire pretty aggressive alignment, right? And what would you guys do for us? How can you solve my problems? Here are my problems. What can you do to make, what can your product and or services do to make us more effective? And so the kind of translation robot, typically in a lot of these, is obviously the SME. Now, some of you might be individual contributors where you are a SME and you're doing both sides of the sale and the SMEing. I get that in some consultative and other ecosystems, it's structured like that. I'm actually going to go through a slide here in a minute for everybody to kind of go through that exercise. But ultimately, at some point in time, somebody has to be able to translate the problems that the client is expressing or prospect and converting that into a solution, right? And so the subject matter expert is the individual on your teams that is helping to convert whatever you're doing, your product, your service, whatever it is, and converting that based on the client's environment, their ecosystem, their unique problems. They'll say they're unique problems. A lot of times they're not super unique. They're within like an ecosystem of unique, right? Those types of things. But ultimately, that is what a SME is helping to do, is to translate and convert what the product offering or service you have, understanding the prospect's environment and their problems, and kind of aligning that matrix so that there is an element of value creation there for that, right? So fundamentally, that's what the SME's role is. So a lot of times organizations will miss this. They'll have just sales reps, and then the prospect starts ghosting them. It's because they're confused and there's really no value there. The flip side of it is you might have SMEs, but if they're getting involved in too many of the deals, then they're tied up and they're not able to address scaling, or what we would frequently say is SMEing at scale, which is what most organizations need to be doing today, is SMEing at scale, and it's extremely tough for them right now. Oh, I should say, program note. Um, I'll be sharing out this deck, the video, and everything right after this, because a lot of these you might want to go through yourself. I forgot to mention that. So don't worry. I'll be sharing all this out here, and probably some other articles that are related to some of the topics I covered today. So don't panic, because there's more homework for you here in a second. So that is the SME's role. Okay, everybody feeling good? Okay, so why should you give a crap? Well, that's a great question. And so, ultimately, these are just two, common ones. There are many more business specific ones that I can't share. But complex B2B sales is complex. I hate to say it now. So I'm 48. I always at some point say this. I'm 48, and I used to be able to do quite a few deals, for sizable investments, and talk to 2 to 3 people, and the deal would be done. Now, in order to facilitate those same opportunities, it might take me 6 months to a year, 30 different decision makers, quite a big proof of concept process or phased approach, like all sorts of things, right? And so times have just changed. The average number of people on the deals skyrocketed. Everything has dramatically changed, and so there's inherently just a crap ton more risk. And then also, people are just not satisfied. Customers, your prospects, are just not satisfied because they're not connecting the dots of where the value kind of is coming from with your product or service. So this is always in sales, you know, kind of hidden from, I don't know why the client is ghosting me, right? And it somehow is switched over that it's the prospect's fault as to why they're ghosting you, when in reality, the ghosting is happening is because you've dropped the ball. And so that's kind of the challenge that is out there. And there's just a lack of trust. And I don't want to say that in certain industries, they're just, people feel like their needs are, they're not being heard, their needs aren't being matched, and so they don't trust a lot of the air quote salespeople. So then they're asking for SMEs to help better align that, and so this trust gap is a huge challenge. And then of course aligning the people for success and making sure it's going to go through. So obviously you don't have to be a mathematician here. This greatly is affecting your top line revenue, obviously. LTV, lifetime value of customers, all sorts of things are dramatically challenged here. Also, what we're seeing, like in many industries, some of you are probably aware, like I'm thinking ISOing to North America right now. North America, we're running out of farmers, right? We're running out of financial advisors, right? Because they're all aging out. Well, in a lot of these corporations too, a lot of the SMEs, individuals who know a lot about the product, what it can do, the service that they're all retiring too. And so we have a SME loss that is happening at an exponential rate. So there's a pretty big tidal wave happening related to this SME category. Because ultimately, I'll be candid, in conversations I have with VPs of sales, CROs, all sorts of things, their number one determination of whether or not the deal went through is the SME. Okay, just take that in. Now, I'm not saying the sales reps aren't doing a good job. No, they are. But the number one differentiator as to why they went with that is, but they'll frequently follow that up with, Tamra, your SME, was really, really good at aligning blank, blank, and blanking, having us see the vision of where this could help this project. So it's kind of in your mind. You almost have to kind of think there's SDRs and sellers, but the real person who's closing the deals in a lot of these cases are the SMEs, because they're building that trust confidence to pull the trigger and buy the solution, buy the project, whatever it is. Okay. Making sense, I hope, for everybody. We're gonna continue on here in Smeville. So next, so what does this mean? What does this mean? Well, buyers don't feel understood, helped, or guided, right? Obviously, I just kind of anecdotally said that, right? And so I encourage you to go back, and this is very easy to do typically nowadays. I don't know if your groups do it. We do. We have lost deals, obviously, and a lot of times we find that the problem was on us, right? A lot of times, and ultimately just asking, what went wrong? Why didn't you pick us? Now, a lot of times there's external factors that you can't control, but it's good to figure this out, right? And also, it's an opportunity for SMEs. So if you are an organization and you're looking to differentiate yourself in the sales process, well, sometimes the most easiest path, specifically, I think if you're an underdog too, um, if you're way more agile, you can do a lot more things faster than some big boys and gals, right? There's some pretty cool things you can do from a SMEing perspective to really wow that prospect of yours, in the face of, basically, we're highly innovative, we want to listen to you, we're trying to make sure this is going to work for you, all those kinds of things as a true partnership could be, right? So again, every negative can be a positive. Hopefully you're somewhere in, those ranges where you can close the gap and create some meaningful opportunities for you. But again, the SMEs are the secret sauce in many of the opportunities now. And again, I'm specifically talking about, clearly, not just a widget or something like that. Simple sales, no SMEs needed. Anything else, SMEs needed. Okay, just to reiterate. All right, we're going to keep going here. Okay, so types of selling scenarios. So this is where you got to put yourself, and yes, any of you, the fonts are purposely different sizes. So with that, I'm talking about today, these are kind of different selling scenarios. And these different selling scenarios kind of apply to SMEs dramatically, right? And so there's consultative selling. Clearly, that's SME driven. Multiple stakeholders, that's a whole different, like that. That's very train wreck. Definitely SMEville. Strategic accounts, any of you who are what I would call the whale hunters, that's awesome. Definitely strategic, definitely SMEville, right? Like everything. Some of you might be individual contributors on that, with like named accounts, being like Timmy or Tammy, here's your 50 accounts, Walt Disney, Turner, go get them. Where you're going to be both player coach, in those kind of scenarios. So you are the SME. So obviously understand that in a lot of relationships. Some it's more team based, channel partners driven sales. So again, each of you on this call today has different sales approaches, and you might be using, one or more of these. Less needed in the bid process. Bid process, for obvious reasons, is a little bit more rigid in its approach. They're basically spitting out their needs typically. I wouldn't say a lot of times it's as accurate, but you know what I'm getting at. And then you got product-led expansion. Now, product-led expansion, I have it there as the smallest. It could be higher up if it's a big platform and more complex platform, but a lot of times that's like for simple solutions, like a constant contact, right, or little products. No hate, just different kind of sales process. But as you look at this, you're now starting to piece together a couple of pieces of the puzzle here, right? You have, okay, I have salespeople, I have SMEs, and then how are we actually selling to our clients? All of these elements become compounding effects into how SMEs are involved and are driving the close chain, basically, of that sales cycle, which I'm assuming for many of you is 2 months to a year on a lot of your transactions. I would say right now, all of you are experiencing longer sales cycles. That's probably too broad, but I would say 95% of you for sure are experiencing longer sales cycles. Now, whether that's economic, cash on the sidelines, potential risks, all sorts of variables. So it's even more important that whatever solution, project, or ever you're working at is very clearly aligned with your prospect so that the ROI, the impact, and everything, they will stick with you during tough times, right? Um, so just again, varying levels of talent and experience on the call, kind of building these building blocks. Hopefully, these help. I assume they do just because they're all part of where SMEs live. So let's get into one quick slide here. This is an obligatory slide that has to be in every single presentation for legal reasons. I'm joking. I just literally probably have this almost in every single presentation just because I think it just visualizes the where we are today, which is just completely different than what it was 10 years ago in complex B2B sales. On the average transaction, you're going to have 7 people from your team. Obviously, that's a smaller group. Frequently, that can be 10 to 15. And then on the purchasing side, it's going to be, yeah, 7 at the minimum. You start playing in regulated industries like a lot of our clients, finance, hospitals, you name it, 25, 35 different decision makers during the purchasing process. And so as you can see, we have a people problem too, right? So we have a process challenge, we have SME needs, we now have how do we convince 30 people of where we're at and that you guys should move forward with this. So the environmental problem is equally as an effect in complex sales and SMEing as the SMEs themselves, right? And so you're having to convince the hearts and minds. Some of you on this call are probably like Joey, you can't even comprehend how many demos I've done to sell a deal. 15 demos, right? 20 demos, right? And lost the deal. Well, yeah, that's the reality. And it's also where the SMEs got to come in and help better align the products and solutions around that. And it's a give or take. I'm not blaming anybody, right? You guys just know it's the hustle. So this is the environment. I think everybody understands that. Hopefully you do. If you're just getting new into this game, this is the environment. 100% this is what you're dealing with. Okay, so let's jump. So there's two sides of this coin. You now are educated the difference between a rep, sales rep, the hustler, the dialer. Get your meetings, start to build the relationship, right? Very, very valuable to the organization. They get that opportunity to a certain point in the gravy train. That gravy train pulls into station and it's like all aboard and the SME gets on, right? And the SME is now going to be part of the sales process to help get this over the line. Okay, so clearly you signed up for this webinar, you probably are aware that we obviously have a very, very successful platform that is used in this ecosystem and onboarding and downstream stuff. But ultimately, now we have access to tons and tons of SMEs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of SMEs. And so we talk to our own SMEs, obviously our clients, and this is where their challenges are also. So this is where SMEs are struggling, and this is what is keeping SMEs up at night. Now, there's a little bit of a duality in these next 3 slides because these are the fears of the SMEs, but these also very much align with the fears of sales leadership within these organizations and onboarding leadership. And I'll get to that here in a second because you might already know that many companies become siloed on both sides, right? Then there's not only aligning the complex sale and SME alignment, but then after this thing is air quotes sold, it then has to go to onboarding and implementation. And a lot of times there's a huge gap in that information and what we would call the handoff, HOs. And so I'm going to get to that here in a second, but just kind of foreshadowing, there is an interactive and it's interactive, but interplay between a lot of these things. So SMEs are struggling obviously with extremely long and unpredictable sales cycles, right? Which obviously you would expect, and both sides of the equation is causing problems. And so there's pressure to close deals faster. There's pressure to do things of that nature, which can become problematic, right? nobody has enough SMEs and no one has enough sales reps, right? So there's always this people, time, money kind of an ecosystem that is tough for a lot of these groups to navigate. We're going to talk about that with SMEing at scale. Reaching decision makers, right? So this is again a big problem. It's not only building the business case and the many a times a proof of concept or a pilot, right? It's also getting that in front of the right people at the right time in order to get all of the collective buy-in that is needed, right? And I know I may be preaching to the choir here, but this is like a little bit lifting the rug, right? And getting into like the real nitty-gritty of what happens here. Because again, sale, SMEing, contracting, proving credibility, right? A lot of it, some of you might be smaller organizations, right? You might have early stage products. You're consulting where you have to prove, outcomes or project. I mean, the list goes on and on. So how do you prove your credibility to all of these different stakeholders? We talked about discounting a little bit. There's a lot of that going on right now. Where that comes into play for many of you is you in the past, this is yeah, this is just another layer of problems for SMEs. Is in the past you used to sell your service or product in one fell swoop, so the SME would help with that, and then the client would go on. Now clients want to take a $200,000 contract, break that into four, no, that would be eight $25,000 contracts. Almost did my math wrong there. Eight projects. So now the SME has to be involved in eight projects instead of one, right? And that's a huge, huge problem. Again, it's because all of your prospects, your clients, are wanting to stagger things out incrementally, right? Another big challenge to your SME ecosystem. Product alignment, there's just, if SMEs are not involved, frequently the solution is almost doomed to fail. I hate to say it. It's just, yeah. When you start getting into integrations, you start getting into security, all sorts of layers of this stuff. You need talented SMEs to help guide that and also build the playbook for that onboarding and getting them to the next level. I already talked about post-sale delivery risk. If this isn't documented, and a lot of this is two-way work, you and the customer building this together, all of this information to really create alignment, because you can't just come up with the alignment. You have to be working with the prospects teams also to get a lot of data from them and kind of building the recipe together. And that's a big part of what our solution does, but that, because it's the biggest risk, is aligning the people and getting that all figured out. We're going to come back to that in a second. Buying committees, again, even after the SME is involved, still a big challenge. This is really the second to last one, huge on repeatable. Being able to do this repeatably is still a huge problem for many of you. And I'll show you how that can be done. But and the fear of missing the window. This is like anybody publicly traded or in highly competitive ecosystems. It's the fear of the missing the window, quarterly numbers, everything like that. So the SMEing isn't done to the quality, and bad deals get done, bad deployments get done, and then they're on their way. So these are a lot of concerns that SMEs have. Also leadership around these SMEs and sales teams overall. I'm sure many of you are like, yep, that's a big concern for us. So it's a big challenge. So we're going to jump now to kind of what I call four. One of them we're going to dive into a little bit deeper because it's about systematizing your process a little bit, and then wrapping that obviously into a system to execute it, which you should be doing. But I'm going to penetrate one of the concepts a little more than others. The first one, I don't care how you do it. Obviously, I wish it's in our solution, is for your sales team. When the deal, we call it the last 25% of the deal, is get everything into a centralized environment. For the love of Pete, it's 2025. When you order a $10 pizza, you have an app, you can watch the pizza being made, delivered, everything. Get your sales process into some sort of centralized ecosystem so that all the critical stakeholders can have visibility, access to all the information that needs to be going back and forth. This is when the SMEs are involved the most, right? Because you're getting into definition, proof of concept phase, You're going to have to collect a lot of data from your prospects. You're having to bring a lot of people together in order to do this. Clearly, our product does this. Maybe you're not ready yet, whatever it is, but please, for effective SMEing, for effective alignment on deals, everything needs to be in a centralized place for all of this communication, collaboration, file sharing. Obviously, we do checklists and mutual plans, all sorts of other stuff to power these processes. But number one, get everything in-house. All of you have Netflix or Disney. I know that it's because you want information on time, available whenever you want. Like, it's just the real world. So it's a very important thing. Please, if you take one thing out of this entire stuff, which I hope is a low ball, please do that, right? Like, that's very, very important to herding the cats. Okay. The second piece that I think you need to heavily consider in all of this is systematizing basically your SME processes. And why I have two things up here is qualify and align. So our clients, obviously people in general, are very, very um, positive about kind of mutual plans. And so why we say mutual plans so much, and we'll repeat it 1,000 times, is because it's two-way. You have the SME and the sales rep and the company, and then you have the prospect and all their infrastructure. You have to be able to work together in order to define the optimal solution for them, to unearth the problems and the challenges, et cetera, right? It has to be two-way. It has to be mutual, and you have to set the right expectations around that. I then have here qualify and align. So here's the main difference between qualify and align. When you're bringing your SMEs in onto transactions, you have to be able to come up with a qualification process that is meaningful enough to authorize the go no go of bringing the SMEs in. You have to protect your SMEs. What happens is the SMEs are being brought into too many deals that are not really ready for them or far enough down the pipeline. Now, you might have the SME qualify the deal with a light level qualification effect, but then the full alignment, aka proof of concept or a trial or a pilot or some sort of customization, or where there's more work. All of your businesses are different. So there's always been this kind of concept of sales reps need to qualify deals. Well, they're what they're qualifying is the client type and need. Yes, but you also have to protect the house on your SMEs. And so for most of our clients, we have another layer that is basically qualifying, that then in many cases has to be approved by leadership, like the VP of sales or onboarding, whoever. And then the SMEs can then be released. So you got to protect the house on your SMEs. Okay. Making sense. And then align is then obviously all the elements downstream from that, all the other proof of concept kind of goals. So all of these ride for us, and the philosophies are via kind of a mutual plan concept. So if you take that spirit and you carry it forward, this then is going to make a lot more sense for you. And I don't know if many of you have, we're going to share this out, but in the world of SMEing, or frequently called pre-sales, this is the kind of the ecosystem we see extensively here. Okay. This process here is what we see extensively being kind of the SME experience for basically the ecosystem. Whoops. So this is basically a process. And so to execute this process, you want to be taking people through, in essence, a SME journey, just like a sales journey. This is like a SME journey. And this is how you're guiding people through the strategic fit. So you're doing a discovery, you're mapping out all the clarity, solution fit assessment, technical validation, or proof of concept, right? Solution, you can read, and I'll share this. But basically, it's taking the environment of SMEing and having a playbook for that to execute that effectively. Of course, you wouldn't even gotten into this if they weren't qualified. So you have the qualifying, and then you actually have the actual SME-led process, which is all this data collection, alignment, all of that, which we consider as pre-sales engagement. That's a very common kind of ecosystem to do this. So you're setting the expectations. You're doing this mutually. It's two-way. Again, this is very critical for the buy-in from the prospect side to keep momentum on the deal. It's also We're going to get to the next slide of how you can do that even more so. But ultimately, it's about a mutual plan, not a one-sided, we're going to come up with an idea for the prospect. No, it has to be jointly created. And that's why everything is mutual in this stuff. The success rate of your stuff will go up at least 25% as far as continuation of the process just by doing that. Okay. Very, very important. The next piece, there's two sides of this equation. It's a shocker. You can kind of maybe get a theme here of how you actually win business and hearts and minds is have relationships and stop selling and pitching. It's called consulting and aligning. And so how you do that is you have your SME now, which is now your deal quarterback. You have the sales rep and the SME as your deal quarterbacks, but the SME is in essence is super classed because they're the expert and they understand where the pieces fit. That's going to be the same thing with the internal champ on your prospect side. So now you have a two-person team of the SME and the internal champ on the other side. So the point of doing everything that I just talked about, centralized, mutual plans, clear roadmap, mutual accountability, clear expectations, is because everybody knows in selling, you're only around for 20% of the time. 80% of the time, nobody from your company is going to be in the room. Who's going to be in the room? The internal champ. So you have to equip the internal champ with everything I just said in order to equip the internal champ to fight the good fight for you internally. That's the whole concept of what happens when you're not in the room. That now you know what's happening because you've equipped the internal champ on these complex deals with the right information, the right approach, the right strategy for him or her to be able to fight for your deal internally. They're all critical pieces to the puzzle overall. And you can't miss any of them because if you just do it and you don't equip the internal champ, they're going to get beat down by internal corporate culture. Corporate culture can destroy people very quickly. So this is real critical. Central, mutual plans, clear visibility, value chain, obviously, SME. Last piece, because I have to move on here, is doing it at scale. But you don't want to scale garbage. You want to scale good. So once you have those initial pieces, what we help, obviously, a ton of our clients do is to do this at a very high scale, high personalization, everything to help them scale their organization. Basically, create processes to help them win more deals, have greater visibility on deals, and don't waste time on deals that are going to go nowhere. So we proverbially call this SMEing at scale. Okay. So they all build upon, I would say, mutual plan concept, biggest direct impact in small volume game. Then obviously scaling is when you have more higher deal transactions. So equally, I won't go through. I'm going to jump out. Proof is in the performance. It works. So 30% efficiency, infrastructure on your teams by far. 30% is like low bar. We hit 30% typically pretty quickly, just purely from team operational standpoint. 40 to 50% engagements. I don't even have to look. These are like so boilerplate as far as we're going to hit them and we're going to hit them fast for our clients. Basically it works, right? And so, but the proof is in the performance because you're structuring it to be successful. And I think that's really the key point of this whole presentation is understanding what SMEing is and then creating a system to SME effectively and being able to do that at scale. Okay. So let me bring one to life for you for about 2 minutes, just so you can kind of obviously visualize if you're wanting to rip off and duplicate or obviously steal ideas. So here we go. So this is what we call a workspace, 30,000 feet, a workspace, both sides of the equation. This is for your team and obviously the prospect because you're going through a sales process. So this is the centralization factor. These workspaces are completely automated in creation off of Salesforce, HubSpot, you name it, super efficient in all of this stuff. So it's not a demo, not going to get into a demo, but I do want to point out a couple of key elements that align because this is what successful groups are doing. So on the left-hand side here, people, clearly, this is all the people from the prospect. This is your SME, sales rep, gray hair, whatever it is over here. Yes, I am a gray hair. I fit into this category. I'm allowed to say it. So that's there. So you got all your people. Then you got all the processes that are happening in your sales mutual plan. So this is during the sales process, and you might have share process examples here. And so this is a complete checklist mutual plan system to guide the conversation, internal tasking, external tasking, data collection, you name it. Everything that is needed for SMEing is in the tool. So all of these data collection, time dates, a survey question, anything you do to collect data from customers to be able to convert that back into a business case, ROI study, all of that is inside the ecosystem. Of course, you can task it out internally and externally. Very, very robust environment to do this. This is how we help clients. But this is an example of a mutual plan during the sales process. Then you might get into after they've been cleared, right? Like we were talking about, protect your resources, right? So after they've been qualified, you then can take them through basically a proof of concept. There's 1,000 names for this. Trials, some people use proof of concept, phase one, like whatever they want to do, right? Thousands of names for this, but this is basically where you're aligning now. The SME is aligning your product, service, consulting, whatever, with the customer's needs, problems, and desires, right? And you're basically walking through a construction plan, basically, right, of where we can create value in the process overall. So again, another mutual plan to drive that. Of course, you might be sharing all sorts of resources and videos and all sorts of course stuff there. Last but not least, where the other huge benefit of creating structure to your entire process here is when you get into internal collab, this is only for the team. Everything that was collected in the earlier stages, no matter what, is automatically centralized for internal handoff and onboarding. Of course, we actually have a solution to actually do the onboarding also, but for today's purposes, we're just talking about SMEing and winning deals. All of this then is then centralized into an internal alignment and go plan. So any of the meaningful documents, resources, data, anything that is here is all then turnkey, ready to ship for a very, very smooth internal handoff, which makes the client very, very happy because you listened the entire time and you're teeing them up for success. So 30,000 foot, I just want to help you kind of visualize and realize that one, there is a better way. Two, you win more. Three, you got visibility on absolutely everything that is going on. Four, quite frankly, it's scalable, repeatable. There's templates, everything here. So as you add more team members, they're plugged into a great process. If you lose a team member, you're able to pick up right where they left off. So this is a real important piece. Now, again, obviously, clearly, it's a nice tool, very successful platform, but it's more the philosophies, right? The philosophies, believing in what I said, in which it works, is really the starting point, obviously, and then aligning the solution behind it to do it effectively can dramatically, obviously, help you and your team. So the proliferation of SMEs is going nowhere. It's going to continue. It's really the difference maker in many yeses or nos on contracts. And what I've just showed you is basically the playbook on how to execute that to excuse me, to success. I'll go back to this slide. This here, this is it at all varying levels, oops, depending on your product and or service. But think of this as basically aligning your process for what we call pre-sales, which is just basically aligning the people, the processes, what data has to be collected, the entire experience around that, and really building what we do, obviously, a robust environment around that, because that is equally a part of the sales process in general. But typically for our clients, it's the last 25 to 30% of the sale is when all of this starts to come into play. So you don't do this top of the funnel. This is obviously as it gets deeper into the ecosystem. So follow up. One last thing. So obviously, as I mentioned, there's a lot of moving pieces to this. I will share out my personal calendar. It's not a demo, but my personal calendar. If you have an environment you want to brainstorm challenges around SMEing and the sales process there, you can just grab a time with me and brainstorm. I just did two today. And so more than willing to help out. I think probably you can tell our style of presentation. So I appreciate that. I would also check out just our corporate site in general, besides this webinar and obviously tons of webinars we do. We have a lot of really good resources around measurement around this, ROI, all sorts of things that really help. But it's interesting. This whole SME out process has really proliferated as far as the almost everything in B2B sales is now almost SME led. Again, over a certain dollar amount, not a widget. But again, appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully, a couple of nuggets of knowledge. Um, I will send out the recap, all the resources. Email me back if you have any immediate questions, or if you have a quick question now, go ahead, plop it into the Zoom, and I will follow up right after the call here and get back to you on that. So again, thanks everybody. Have yourself a great rest of the day and week, and we'll be talking soon.